The Old West gave us some of the wildest outlaws in history, and the stories surrounding them have turned them into legends. We have wild heists, classic Old West duels, saloon brawls. It's gonna be a hootin' hollerin' hell of a time. Let her rip. How's this for scary? A cowboy serial killer with a penchant for consuming parts of his victims. The man's name was Boone Helm. He was born in Lincoln County, Kentucky in 1828. There's no better way to say it. This guy was a wild man. He always hated authority, and when he got married at 22, he would frequently ride his horse inside the house, drank heavily, and also started showing his violent side. He would beat his wife. His behavior led to a divorce, and he ended up heading to California for gold. His journey west quickly descended into chaos, though. Helm killed his cousin when he tried to bail on traveling together, a crime for which he was briefly imprisoned and then mistakenly sent to a mental asylum. Helm escaped and continued west, leaving a trail of bodies along the way. He admitted to eating parts of his victims when desperate. One of his most famous quotes, "Many's the poor devil I've killed at one time or another, and the time has been that I've been obliged to feed on some of them." Helm's life was a constant run from the law, filled with violent encounters and robberies. Finally, after aligning with the infamous outlaw Henry Plummer, Helm's luck ran out. Captured in Montana, he faced a vigilante trial and was hanged in 1864. And this guy's last words? "Every man for his principles. Hurrah for Jeff Davis. Let her rip." Then he leaped off the hangman's box himself before it was even kicked away. What an end. Next up, we have John Wesley Hardin, one of the Wild West's most notorious outlaws, born in Texas in 1853. At a very young age, Hardin took his first life, having stabbed a schoolmate, and before turning 20, he claimed to have killed several men. The reasons for these killings varied from self-defense to personal disputes and revenge. Hardin himself would always insist these acts were necessary, though, famously quoted saying, "I never killed anyone who didn't need killing." He was famous for his marksmanship and quick reflexes, known to be so fast and accurate with his piece that he could outdraw and outshoot just about anyone. Hardin was pretty much always on the run from the law. He had some stints in jail, but his longest prison term began in 1877 when he was finally captured by Texas Rangers. Hardin was sentenced to 25 years but served 17 before being pardoned, and during this time in prison, he got a lot done. He studied law and wrote an autobiography. After his release in 1894, Hardin tried to lead a straight life and even passed the bar exam to become a lawyer, but old habits die hard, and so did he. In 1895, just a year after his release, Hardin was killed in a saloon in El Paso, Texas by John Selman, a lawman and gambler. Big Nose George did not receive the type of burial many of us would hope for. His tale is one of the most macabre of the Old West. Unlike most outlaws of the time, his story doesn't just end with taking a bullet. George Parrott was born in 1834. He led a life of crime. He'd robbed stagecoaches and trains, but one robbery went wrong. In 1878, George and his gang attempted to derail and rob a train near Medicine Bow, Wyoming, but they failed, and the botched job set the authorities on their trail. In 1880, after being on the run and continuing his criminal activities, George was finally caught when he bragged about his crimes in a saloon. He was arrested for the attempted train robbery and killing of 2 lawmen who tried to stop his crew's previous crimes. While waiting to be hanged, George tried to escape by attacking the jailer, hitting him over the head with his shackles, but his escape plan failed, and the townspeople, who were furious about his attack on the jailer, decided to take justice into their own hands. They hanged him from a telegraph pole in 1881. But then George's body was given to 2 doctors who studied his brain to try and understand what made him a criminal, see if they could find out what made him tick. But then they started getting creative and ended up using part of his skull as an ashtray. They also used parts of his skin to make a pair of shoes and a medicine bag, which were kept by one of the doctors who actually wore the shoes to his inaugural ball after being elected as the first Democratic governor of Wyoming. Yeah, wild, Wild West indeed. Doc Holliday. What an insane life this man had. He started out as a dentist, but became one of the baddest cowboys in history. John Henry Holliday was born in 1851 in Georgia. All he wanted to do was fix teeth, and he began training as a dentist. But unfortunately, fate had other plans for him. Holliday was diagnosed with tuberculosis in his early 20s. He moved to the American Southwest, where he hoped the drier air would help alleviate his symptoms. Sadly, he couldn't practice dentistry regularly because of his illness, so he turned to gambling to make a living. And Doc quickly gained a reputation as a skilled card player and a deadly gunman. He became good friends with Wyatt Earp, who he met in Texas. Doc would later join Earp in the famed gunfight at the OK Corral in Tombstone, Arizona. This incident involving the Earp brothers and the Clanton-McClurry gang cemented Holliday's reputation as this fearless, loyal friend, willing to stand by Wyatt through thick and thin. Definitely watch the movie Tombstone if you're at all interested in this story. Fantastic movie. And Val Kilmer's performance as Doc Holliday, perfection. One of the coolest, classiest cowboys in a Western. Anyway, Holliday's health continued to decline, and he died in 1887 at the Glenwood Springs Sanatorium at 36. His famous last words were, "This is funny," because he had this wild life and survived so many violent altercations, so dying in bed of a sickness after all of that, kinda funny. Tom Horn's life was pretty dramatic as well. Born in 1860, Horn worked various roles. He was a scout, cowboy, soldier, range detective, but probably most well known as a contract killer. His exploits became pretty legendary. He had a knack for ending up in the thick of violent encounters. He was believed to be a hitman for cattle barons, hired to intimidate and eliminate rustlers or land rivals during the range wars. His methods were brutal and effective, and this was just not a guy you wanted to mess with. The most infamous incident involved the killing of a boy named Willie Nickel in 1901. Horn was arrested and tried for the death. He was convicted based mostly on a confession he made while intoxicated during a conversation with a detective who was using a stenographer hidden in the next room. Tom Horn was hanged in 1903. And many believe that he was set up, that his confession was coerced or just fabricated. Next up we have Clay Allison, born in 1840 in Tennessee. After serving in the Confederate Army during the Civil War, where he was discharged due to an emotional disorder, Allison headed to Texas to become a cowboy and later a rancher. Allison was known for being unpredictably violent, and just unpredictable in general. One story goes that he paraded around town with the corpse of a man he just killed. One of the most famous stories, is how he rode through the streets naked while heavily intoxicated. Another notable incident was when he had a dentist strapped to a chair and forcibly pulled out one of his teeth as a form of revenge for a botched dental procedure that Allison endured without anesthesia. Allison died in 1887, not from a violent altercation like you'd probably expect though, but in a complete accident. He was thrown from a wagon and broke his neck. Longhair Jim Courtright was one of the most notorious lawmen in the Old West. This guy's life really leads like a classic Wild West adventure. Jim Courtright made his mark in Fort Worth, Texas, where he became the marshal and took on the job of cleaning up a town filled with rowdy gamblers and outlaws, basically your classic Wild West town. Courtright was known for being tough, and his methods weren't really by the book. Alongside enforcing the law, he ran a protective service where he'd offer local businesses safety from thieves and vandals, but those who didn't pay would find themselves dealing with him. He also had a reputation for his expert skill with his sidearm, but his final fight would be against Luke Short, a well-known gambler and saloon owner, and the story goes that tensions between the two over Courtright's protection racket came to a head in a classic face-off in 1887. Courtright insisted on Short using his protective service, and Short told him to, quote, go to hell. So the two had a duel in the street, and this time though, Courtright wasn't quick enough on the draw. Alright, this next three, they're all names you've probably heard at some point or another. Next on the list is Butch Cassidy. Gotta say, by the way, just take a look at this guy. Any name more appropriate than Butch? Butch Cassidy was born Robert Leroy Parker in 1866 in Utah. He grew up in a large Mormon family. He took to the life of an outlaw really early on, adopting the name Butch Cassidy and forming including the famous Wild Bunch gang, which pulled off some of the most daring bank and train robberies of the time. Now, unlike a lot of outlaws of the time, he preferred planning and executing robberies without causing death. He was a pretty smart guy and had a bit of a better reputation compared to some of the more ruthless folks on this list, but I mean, that doesn't mean the guy wasn't scary in his own way. One of the craziest heists led by Cassidy was the 1900 train robbery near Tipton, Wyoming, where his gang made off with a large haul that led to a massive manhunt. Butch Cassidy and the Wild Bunch were also known for using the Outlaw Trail, a series of hideouts stretching from Montana to Mexico, which allowed them to evade the law successfully for years. But as the law began closing in, Cassidy and his closest companion, the Sundance Kid, fled to South America, where they continued their criminal activities. Now, it's a bit murky how this story ends. Some think Cassidy and the Sundance Kid died in Bolivia during a shootout with soldiers. Others say he might have survived and returned to the United States and lived out the rest of his days under a new name. Billy the Kid was born Henry McCarty in 1859 in New York City. He moved west as a boy and later adopted the alias William H. Bonney. Billy's criminal career began at a very young age, and he was known for his daring escapes. One after being sentenced to hang for the killing of a sheriff during the Lincoln County War. Billy killed 2 guards and fled, escaping capture for months. He had a reputation as this dangerous outlaw, having supposedly killed 21 men in his 21 years of life, but he was also known for his charm and charisma, which won him a good number of friends in various places. Some saw him as a ruthless killer, but he's kind of become known as a cool anti-hero. He was said to be fluent in Spanish, he was popular with the ladies, and he was capable of acts of kindness, which has really helped add to the legend that surrounds him today. But Billy the Kid's life came to an end in 1881 when Sheriff Pat Garrett tracked him down and killed him in Fort Sumner, New Mexico. He was just 21 years old. And how can you do a top 10 cowboy list without talking about Jesse James himself? I don't think it gets any more iconic than this guy. He's become known as the Robin Hood of the Wild West. He was notorious for his career as a bank and train robber. Born in Missouri in 1847, Jesse and his brother Frank James were guerrillas, known as bushwhackers for the Confederate side, participating in brutal campaigns against Union forces, which set the stage for their later life of crime. After the war, Jesse, Frank, and other former Confederates formed the James Younger Gang. The group became famous for their daring heists, robbing banks, trains, stagecoaches across various states. Jesse James became a bit of a folk hero at the time because, as some stories go, that he would distribute some of his stolen wealth to the poor. It's not 100% certain that's actually what went on, though. The media really helped craft the image of Jesse as a heroic rebel, standing against the injustices of the time. In 1882, though, Jesse James was killed by Robert Ford, a younger member of his gang who betrayed him for a bounty. With all that said, folks, I've been your host, James, and I'll catch you, yes, you specifically, in the next video.